Through the mist and fog of great antiquity, there remains one of the sacred treasures of Japan.
When I was a kid, I remember the stories of World War II, and I was always fascinated by them. And I would lay down in bed at night, and my dad would come in and lay down, and I would ask him to tell a story of World War II. Those were my favorite stories. They were pretty exciting times.
The story about to unfold is of two men from different worlds who met as enemies, but became close friends through the spirit of a samurai sword.
Okay, I'm going to connect everyone. Minoru Kahara. This is the old Navy U.S. captain.
I know.
This brings a vivid picture to my mind in truck. On the south side, when they were evacuating this long line of these sad, sad soldiers out to a Japanese destroyer on an old rickety barge. And up steps this young man with such a warm smile, twinkle in his eye. I believe he had an interpreter, and he was presenting something that was so sad, his heritage in that sword. I saw that, and I loved him for it. And I took a vow I was going to return that sword to that man come hell or high water someday.
According to Japanese mythology, the gods of Izanami and Izanagi descended from heaven on a rainbow to create the islands of Japan. Closely linked to this mythology are the three sacred objects: the kama-shaped beads, the mirror, and the sword. In time, the sword became symbolic of the samurai. Legend holds that the first samurai sword was forged in the year 700 AD by the great swordsmith Amakuni in reaction to his emperor's displeasure when the straight swords of his warriors broke as they struck solid objects. After a long period of concentrated prayer, Amakuni secluded himself with his son and created the now famous samurai sword. It took on a spiritual nature, and to the samurai, his sword became his soul. In an older generation, amongst a few, that pride, that honor, that old way of the samurai still exists today.
My house was in Fukushima-ken, so Mangham, a house of the military class. My grandfather was a samurai and participated in the Heian War, the Meiji Boshin Wars, and he represented the Soma group as a samurai.
During his life, Minoru Kohata practiced the values of Bushido, the old way of the samurai. It was a code that taught honor and self-sacrifice in the pursuit of justice, dignity, and humanity. Unknown to Minoru Kohata, far away in another land, in a world very different from his own, he was to find another of a similar kind.
The beginning of the Rinn family in America started when my grandfather from Germany and my grandmother from Paris, France met in Williamsburg, Kansas. My father was one of the older children, and he brought the Rinn's furniture and belongings from Kansas to their settlement here in Enid. My mother, she had such common sense, she had such character, she had such devotion. I remember so many things about my mother, of some of our walks. She couldn't stand anyone that would slouch over. She'd say, "Jack, get your head up in the sky with God. Walk tall. If you don't have respect for yourself, no one else will have respect for you."
私が小さい時に亡くなったんですが、 My mother died when I was still small, but I recall that she was a mother who loved flowers. And since I really loved to grow flowers, my mother was very happy with me. My father, well, because my mother died early, I think he had a difficult life. But I remember getting coins from my father and running to the store to buy candy.
Really, my first job was at a concession that my dad had at the baseball park. He sold soda pop and ice cream bars and cushions. And I was 7 years old, and I would have these little six-pack carriers, and he'd give me six-pack, and I think we sold a bottle of soda water for 10 cents or something like that, or a nickel. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was kind of like my dad. I guess I was a joiner at that time. I played sports. I played baseball, basketball. I was more active in sports so I wouldn't be around adults that used to say, well, what happened to your face? You know, because I really had freckles, and then I had red hair on top of it. And if I heard someone a block away say the word red or freckles, I'd get a baseball bat, I'd go after them. It was stupid, it was dumb. And I've got a cut ear, a split lip, a broken nose, everything else from it.
After I was enrolled in the officers' college and became a regular student and was appointed an officer, I required a sword. My grandfather, at that time, having come from a military family, found a special sword in the family collection and gave it to me. I accepted it most gratefully. I was extremely happy, yes, to have such a valuable sword from my samurai ancestors. The sensation was of utter joy. The sword was a product of the early Tokugawa era and was made in the famous sword-making town of Seki. This sword had been passed down in my family from generation to generation, and this is the sword that my grandfather gave to me.
As war approached, the concerns of youth were soon forgotten. Young men gathered from around the world to march off with patriotic pride to face an enemy they did not know.
I was home from college for the summer, and that was where I was lying on the floor and just sort of taking a nap in the afternoon. And there was an announcement came over the radio that there would be a V7 program for the Navy for college graduates. And so I knew I was going to have to go into the draft. So I said, that's what I want to do. I want to go into the Navy.
You had plenty money, 1922. You let other women make a fool of you. Why don't you do right like some other men do? Get out of here and get me some money too.
I always felt that if you have the persistence, you have the ambition, and you have the enthusiasm, you can do anything.
But Jack Rinn was really a grand skipper. Also, when he was exec, he was a great executive officer.
Jack Rinn was a friend, and right now I feel as close to him as one time he was my brother.
It was a lot of discipline, which a lot of the guys didn't like. But without discipline, you don't have a good crew.
He had them freckles. When the sun would come out, his freckles would cover his face, you know, and he looked so handsome in that uniform, you know. He looked like a prince, you know. I admired him, really.
he was fair. He believed in all of us being treated alike, and he was a good officer.
Remember the day when I was called up to the captain's office of Dutch Harbor, and he said, "You are taking over the command of the YP-72." I said, "Captain, do you know where I'm from?" And he said, "Yes, you're from Enid, Oklahoma." And I said, "I've never been in a rowboat before, so how can I take over?" He said, "You'll figure that out." So I went back to the ship, incidentally, and told the crew of, I think it was about 15, I said, "You have a new captain, me." And these were all ex-fishermen, and there's not a better sailor in the world than a fisherman. So I said to the boatswain's mate, I said, "You are going to be the captain starting tomorrow. You're going to show me how to bring this ship in and bring this ship out and how to maneuver this ship, and we're going to do that for a week. But be careful. You're going to be a captain for a week, but I'm going to be the captain forever."
In 1937, with the outbreak of the Japan-Sino War, I was appointed as a company commander. And in June, I was shipped to China, then to northern China, central China, and to various sectors until 1939. All during this time, I was in the battlefield. Since the sword was the soldier's spirit, I wore it reverently at my side. It was always there to protect me.
The fondest memories of my time in the Navy was aboard the Keith. They were quite a group. They were gentlemen, and then they were bandits. They were one or the other, but always active, but dependable, on the job when you needed them.
I wanted to survive. I didn't want to die. I was young. I was as young as anybody else, 18, 19, 20 years old. And I just want to patch, just throw it all away.
I went through boot camp in San Diego, and that was right in 1942 when the U.S. Navy was getting the living hell kicked out of it out in the Pacific. I saw a couple of these aircraft carriers come into San Diego with holes in them. You could fly a B-29 right through the holes. They were so big. And they were listing at 45 degrees, and it scared the devil out of me. I didn't want to go to sea.
It was a great ship. We had a happy ship in the Keith.
The course of war redirected the paths of Lieutenant Commander Rinn and Major Kohata to the Central Pacific towards a group of Paradise Islands called Truk.
I went immediately to the division headquarters in Kanazawa. At that time, my wife went with me. There, as an advisor, we planned the logistics of the Truk Island operation. And since I was appointed the commander of the rear guard and was responsible for supplies, I arrived at the island ahead of the division.
I was the driver for the general headquarters on Truk and was frequently with the officers of the command. During the day, I took care of their needs. I recall relatively long conversations with Kohata-san, who was a well-respected officer. When I first arrived at the Truk Islands, I thought I had stepped into paradise. The weather was beautiful, and the food was plentiful. Since it was my first time in a foreign land, and because of the wonderful climate, I was very happy. However,
at 6:50 a.m. on February 16, 1944, the United States Navy launched Operation Hailstone, the first of many attacks on the Truk Islands in the Central Pacific. 72 Navy Hellcats, Avengers, and Dauntless dive bombers, based on 5 fast carrier groups of Task Force 58, eliminated any potential Japanese threat to the rear of the Allied attacks on Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. Operation Hailstone destroyed 60 ships and strategic shore targets with 400 tons of bombs and aerial torpedoes over a 2-day period. Methods of resupplying Truk were cut off, leaving 30,000 Japanese stranded without food.
During the bombing, most of the division would be in the air raid shelters. The anti-aircraft battalions, however, were at their battle stations, performing their job of combating. I was usually with one of these battalions, conducting the action. I guess this was the majority of the time.
I don't have much of a memory. But when we had the air raids, I was appointed as a platoon leader, and therefore was in a frightening situation. The duty of the leader was to stay his ground, not to move. As a result, I thought I could fall dead at any moment. These are my vivid memories. You know what is more frightening? Well, that's to be shelled from offshore. At that time, I think it was an English battleship. She would start firing. Boom! If it is an air raid, you can watch the planes and get the general drift. But offshore firing, you really can't figure out where the shells are going to fall. Even thinking about it is frightening.
Initially, the damage was great, but then, as we got used to the constant bombing, we became less afraid.
The food situation was initially good, but after the bombings, the food supply slowly deteriorated. We began to grow sweet potatoes and other things. We tried to gather food from the sea and live off this meager amount of food.
The bombing continued and food became scarce. We lived off sweet potatoes we'd grow on the islands. So when some of the bombs would explode in the lagoon, fish would float up and we would be happy. We would call these fish MacArthur rations.
We convoyed to Okinawa, and then we would go out to the picket lines. Now, I went from the outer picket line into the inner picket line when the Japanese came in to bomb Okinawa. The kamikaze at night would fly over us with their lights on, hoping we would open fire, and then they would follow the tracers right into the ship. Or they would make a pass at you. Of course, they could maneuver very much faster, but we would take evasion action and try to get rid of them. So anyway, this one hit our radar mast. There was 12 of us up on the bridge, and there was only 3 of us left. After it got through, the shrapnel got the rest of them. So we took them right on into Guam, and they met them and notified their parents, but they never did want anyone to ever talk about that or acknowledge that they were ever hit. The day finally arrived when we celebrated VJ Day in Okinawa. The next morning, I received orders to leave Okinawa and proceed to Guam and report to CINCPAC, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Ocean. It was about a 2 or 3 day trip down there. We took it slow and easy. And we were given the islands in the Marshall and Carolinas to visit and go ashore on all these islands, and accepted the surrender for the United States, tell them the war was over with, and bring back, or there would be an LST come to those islands and pick them up and evacuate them back to Japan. And that was like Euripik, Ifalik, and all these very small islands. And one island we went to, the Japanese aboard ship had a Japanese flag, and they would put it on our lifeboat, and we'd go into the islands. And one island, they came out with a Japanese flag attached to their boat. And then when they saw that there was Americans in ours, they hightailed it back to the island. And we went back, when we got to the islands, there had been about 15 of them had committed harakiri.
I heard the Emperor's imperial edict announcing the end of the war over the radio on August 14th, 1945. Well, everybody was... I think each of us took this news in different ways. At the general headquarters, we were very disappointed. There were some that cried. We were all despaired and disappointed.
And we went on, and then we went into truck. This was one of the highlights of my Navy career, was to go into truck. There was about 6 or 7 major islands, big tall hills, with the channel running in and out and through every one of them.
Let me tell you, when we lost the war, we didn't know what horrible atrocities we were to face when the American military advanced upon us. We were very concerned. With the initial meeting, however, we discovered that the Americans conducted themselves in a very gentlemanly manner.
We went ashore to evacuate all the Japanese that we possibly could. Going into truck was quite a lesson for me in humanity. The kindness of our people, of being ashore with their bitter enemies, the Japanese, and you could see them talking or saying hello or shaking hands with each other. And I noticed this one officer standing over to one side. I was observing all of this myself, and along with my landing party. And finally, with a pause in the line of inspection or something happened, he walks up with another man, with another officer that spoke English, and he handed me an envelope, a manila envelope, and in the manila envelope was these Japanese fine rice paper, and on that rice paper was the whole history of a sword he was going to give me. The Japanese interpreter said that the major wants you to have his sword because you have been so nice. The way this party is evacuating our people, because we heard just entirely different, that we would probably never live to get off the island, and we were just so happy.
At that time, many of those who were starving were saved. The American military replenished our supplies. And at that time, Jack Rinn came. He treated us very kindly, and I was pleased and extremely thankful. Since there was no other way to show my gratitude, I presented him with my sword.
And that was just about the end of it, and I shook his hands and thanked him for the sword, and that I would certainly take good care of it. But at the time that I received the sword, I had in my mind, this sword means so much to him, as I put myself in his place. If I had to give him my sword, how I must feel as surrendering my country, my sword, my honor, and my profession. It hurt. So I said to myself, I'm going to try my level best to get this sword back to him sometime. I was so dumb, I didn't think, well, where am I going to send it? So, a few years went past, and then I contacted the Japanese embassy in Washington, D.C. I had the name and about how old he was, and he was in the Army. Well, they wrote back after a month or two and said that we have no records, or the Japanese Army has no records of Kahata.
My mom and dad were married in a small church in Reading, Pennsylvania. Mom passed away when I was still young, and Dad was left with the job of bringing up 6 of us young kids on his own. Some of our favorite memories were Dad's stories about the war. And among the many stories that my dad used to talk about, he talked about the time he received the samurai sword from the Japanese major in the Pacific. And I carried that story with me as I grew up, and Then one day I found myself going to Japan in the course of working at my job. And when I got over there, or prior to leaving for Japan, I asked my dad to give me the information he had on the Japanese man who gave him his sword. And I guess I just thought I'd give it a shot, a long shot, because it was many years later. I didn't know how old the major was at the time, and he could have been long gone. But I took the information over with me and gave it to my Japanese host at the stone company.
Mr. Scott Rinn, who was the vice president of the company, he visited us. And when he visited us, he wrote me a letter if I could find Major Kohata for his father.
And said what I'd like to do is see if there's any way to track a Japanese veteran. And he said that he wasn't sure if he could do that or not, but that he would do what he could.
After I read that letter, I felt it would be very difficult to find him. More than 40 years have passed since the World War II ended. I met a friend of mine who knows the Japanese Army institution quite well. He suggested me a War History Department research institution. Several days later, I received a letter from Mr. Miyauchi of that department. To my surprise, in the letter, not only Mr. Kohata's address, but also even the telephone number is written.
Kenyabashi did call Minoru Kohata on the phone and said that I had been over there, that my father had a samurai sword that Kohata had handed to him in 1945. And he said that Kohata just couldn't believe it.
There were many plans to get the sword back, and Mr. Rinn and I discussed it. Initially, Mr. Scott was to bring the sword over to Japan, but because of Japanese laws, this could not be done. Therefore, it was packaged and mailed. The sword then had to pass an examination to prove its historic value in order to be allowed back in Japan. When it passed the examination, we were so emotionally wrought that we had a private celebration. It was very emotional. We put the sword in the family temple to offer it to the gods. We then offered up the sacred wine and rejoiced at the return of the precious sword. With love and respect to an old fellow soldier, Mr. Jack Rinn. On April 19th, I received the sword without any damage. It has a very cherished and sentimental value to me. Thank you so very much. This was a very dramatic experience because I thought I would never see it again. Also, it was a well-made sword passed down from my ancestors. Its return was like seeing a son who had died walk through the door. Thank you. Thank you very much from the depth of my heart, because I believe all this was done on your idea of humanitarian ethic and dignified love. Now it is spring, and the flowers are blooming, birds are singing, and our hearts are rejoicing because of this enjoyable season. Life is very important for you and for me, so I will always hope that we cherish and value life. Yours respectfully, Minoru Kohata.
With respect and admiration to my good friend, Minoru Kohata, I think of you as a close friend as I have ever had, and yet we hardly know each other. That was until a short time ago, when we started corresponding this past year. Minoru, we accomplished our objectives in a most unusual manner. through the help of my fine son Scott, who had heard me talk about you and the sword, and now the rest is an interesting story for history. My health is as good as could be expected, considering all the missing parts I no longer have, and which are important to normal health. Major, it would be good to hear from you when you have the time. In the meantime, my prayers and good wishes are with you and your family, with continued good health, happiness, and enjoying your daily life. Kindest regards, Jack Rinn.
Dear Mr. Jack Rinn, ever since my last letter, I hope you are doing well. Now the cherry blossoms are almost gone, and it is the green leaf season in Tokyo. How is your place? Thank you very much for the wonderful picture. I envy your 6 excellent children. Children are our most important treasure. I have 1 boy and 2 girls. Yesterday was Mother's Day in Japan. We had a family celebration to express everyone's thankfulness for their mother. By the way, we Japanese say that life is fate. I feel our fate is really mystic, because we came across each other's path for only a short time on Truk Island, where our miraculous fate had its beginning. This is an important fate to me, and I would like to keep in touch with you as much as I can. Thank you again for my sword. I believe your intentions will brighten up my family forever. Thank you very much. I have come to the end of the letter. Please take care of yourself, Jack, and enjoy a long life. Respectfully, Minoru Kohata.
Dear Minoru, it has been a while since I last received word from you. I have thought of you so many times, hoping and praying that you are enjoying good health and are happy, enjoying the life to the fullest. In Oklahoma, harvesting of the wheat and other grains are completed, and the farmers are now preparing for soil for next year. On Friday every week, a group of 15 close friends get together for lunch to discuss the current problems or good things that are happening, local, state, national, and especially international. Of course, we discuss the good old days when we were children.
Well, I've known Jack for years and years. He and I went through high school together. So I've known him a long time. I've always thought Jack was a great guy. We had a lot of fun together.
In fact, he's a good-hearted person. I'm just not saying that. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be returning this sword.
Since my last letter, I spoke with a journalist about the story of my sword. He printed a nice article in the newspaper. Since my picture was in the paper, I have had many phone calls and letters from many friends who are happy to see me in the paper with such a warm story. Because of your work, suddenly I am famous.
When I read the paper, my immediate thought was, my, what big hearts these Americans have.
These 2 people were great on both sides, the one who initially gave and the other who received and then returned.
Currently, after 45 years, Kohata-san's Japanese sword, which is precious second only to his life, has been returned to Kohata-san's side through the kindness of Mr. Rinn. This event brings great joy to him and also to me. With the development of this personal friendship, it is my hope that it will serve as an example of friendship for others in Japan and the United States, and will spread around the globe. In Japan, since ancient time, the sword has been called the soul of the samurai. Therefore, it was something extremely precious. We feel absolutely blessed that it has been returned at this time. Really, to have been the recipient of Jackson's most moral act of returning the sword to us, we are so obliged that there are no words to express our gratitude. I thought at the time, Bushido, the way of the samurai, is exclusively a thing of Japan. But now I think that in the United States there are a great many people with the same character, and this boosts my spirits, and I feel thankful.
Thank you again for holding. I'd like to take a roll call now. Mr. Jack Rinn.
Speaking.
And Mr. Kobata.
Hello.
Mr. Kobata.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I am. Hello, Jack.
Hello.
Hello.
Is this Minoru?
Yes, I am. How are you?
I am fine.
Fine. Good.
I've been practicing my Japanese.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh.
That's I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I'm trying to say that with love and respect.
I am very glad to see your voice.
What's that?
Oh.
He says it's very, very, very good to hear your voice.
Oh, it's so good to hear his voice again. It's hard to believe it's been so long since we met on the island of Truck.
ところでね、ジャックさん。
I'd like to talk to you.
今日ね、私たちはね、
We are having a
トラック島におった親友の人たちと一緒に今集まってミーティングをやってます。
We are having a big reunion here at this beautiful house in Japan, in Kanazawa.
Well, it's hard to believe that we can have such a close relationship, and we have only met one time for a few minutes. And I really mean it when I say love and respect. I admire Kohata so much. And at that time on Truck, I took a vow that come hell or high water, I was going to return that sword to this young man, because I could tell by looking at him how much it meant. And it was a sacred treasure to him. And it finally was accomplished. But not only that, but it's a wonderful person I have met that I'll treasure the rest of my life.
あなたに対する友情と尊敬の気持ちを強くするとともに、今後この友情と尊敬の気持ちをますます強めていきたいと思います。
He said he would like to continue with love and respect as long as possible, as long as we live, because this is the most important thing to him. You got that, Jack?
As far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure it is the same with Minoru, that it will be as long as we live, and not only will it be the same, but it will even continue to get better, because we will get to know each other better. And I hope that I get over this sickness, that I'm going to try to, if at all possible physically, to come to Japan and visit with him. But in the meantime, my sickness is getting a little bit better, and I just hope that I get it cured and can come over and see my wonderful friend.
あなたは私より2つも若いんですから、元気を出して頑張ってください。
He says, as I've told you before, and time again, I will tell you again, you are 2 years younger than I am. So be sure you hang in there real tough. Get that lead out.
Right. my friend.
元気で頑張ってくださいよ。
Be sure you give it all you got, and good luck to you.
I want to thank you very much.
私はトラック投資の部会の世話をしております中野幸三と申します。今回のこの企画本当に素晴らしく、私は涙の出るほど嬉しいですよ。
Did you get that?
No, I didn't.
Well, He said he's the one who's been taking us around in this big van. In fact, I think he bought the van for us so that he could truck us around. And it's a beautiful van which will carry all the luggages as well as all of us. And he kind of broke up at the end.
I'm glad everything turned out just as it did, because everything is working perfect for you. And for my dear, wonderful friend, Manoa, I'm happy for him, happy for me, and happy for... I'm just happy about all of this, the way it's turning out.
我々は帰ってこれるか来れないかわからなかったんです。それがこの恩情でもって帰ってこられたことを今更に感激しております。あの時は食料不足で我々も栄養失調でもう倒れる寸前のところを助かったんです。私この部下のこの一平卒がこんな大きなことを言って誠に失礼ですが、皆の気持ちは私と同一と私は思います。私は本当に考えして無料です。ありがとうございました。
He was just a private, and he speaks of for everybody here. He is the same one that I talked to before. He is in tears. He just wants to say that they weren't quite sure that they were going to make it back. They didn't have anything to eat. They were ready to be starved out, and yet you were so kind. And actually, the sword really did save him. This sword is supposed to save lives by warding off evil, and this sword did ward off evil in promoting the friendship between the two people and also the two countries. He says he speaks for everybody in thanking you and thanking the sword. As you gave it back to Kohata, this means that the cycle of the sword is complete.
That's amazing.
We're now boarding our rows this time. Rows 1 through 22 for flight 1215 to Oklahoma City.
I'm Elaine, and I live in Big Spring. You want me to introduce my husband? Okay, this is Lee, my husband, and our son, Jay. This is Dean, your my son, and his wife, Di.
And so I was wondering why. Now I know
Quiet. Scott's got something he wants to tell you about.
What I really want to do is just tell you about a story that involves my dad. At the end of World War II, there was a Japanese major that came up to him and handed him a 300-year-old samurai sword. He had been a descendant of a samurai family, and this sword had been in his family a long time, so it was obviously a very emotional thing for him to have to hand it to my dad. And sure enough, a few months later, I got a letter in the mail saying that they had found him, and his name was Minoru Kohata. I just want to add that, it's great to be here with our family, but friendships are important too. And old friendships are particularly important, I think, and especially sometimes when you haven't seen an old friend for a long time. So today, I'd like to introduce now an old friend of my dad who he hasn't seen in 45 years, Minoru Kohata. Oh my God. I can't believe this. Oh, good to see you. Oh, bless your heart anyway. When did you get here? What are you doing to me? You were bad when you were an enemy. Now you're my friend.
Today I come meeting you.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
I am very glad to see you. Very, very glad.
You have been such a valuable help. I had no idea. You just talked to Mom. And that we were from a different environment entirely. We were different.
アメリカでなぜ戦争するかもよくはわからなかった。
All right, are you all set? All right. All right. There you go. There you go. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll walk right over here.
Thank you, thank you.
You're a great putter.
Thank you, thank you.
Good game.
Good day.
Good game.
Nice day.
That was a nice putt. Well, isn't that sun beautiful?
Oh, very beautiful.
Yeah.